So back in Substance Painter, we can begin painting our alpha maps to cut out our decals. And we want to create an opacity layer on this now. So if we jump into our layers here, and then if we just make a new one over the top, and we can just call this opacity. And let's just drop in a fill for this. Okay. So then what we need now is we actually need to activate the opacity channel. So we go back to texture set settings. In here we have our normal channels, and we can add some more through this. So in here we'd add like we'd add our emissive channel, but right now we just want our opacity. So I'm going to click opacity there, and that'll add it there. So we go back to our layers and go back to our fill that we just added. We can go to fill properties, and we've got opacity here. So I can get rid of everything else and just open opacity, and I can turn this to black. Now with black, that means nothing is going to be seen other than what we identify here. So I want to paint in the little pieces that we've done. So we can do that by adding another layer and setting this to white. So I'm going to type that as opacity white and opacity black. So in opacity white, we're going to add a black mask, or we can add a mask with color selection. Let's do color selection, and then we can pick a color, and we can pick our maps here, and then we can add a paint over the top of that as well. So this is where we're going to neaten this off a little bit. So with the paint and black selected, and we've got a nice soft brush selected here, and we can probably do this in the UV window so that we know that we're straight onto it. If you went to paint in here, if you hold shift, you can create a straight line, and you can go like that and make some straight lines, but you can also snap this as well. So if we hold shift and then control, we'll get this. So we just click anywhere on the canvas, hold shift and control, we'll get a nice straight line. So shift, control. So you need to just click where you want it to start, shift, control, and we'll get a nice straight line there. And the same here. And if you want to do this while seeing the rest of the models in scene, what you can do is we can just unhide the black opacity map there, come back here and go to material, but then just for while we do this, come back to your material here and just tick on color as well and set that to a color. And that way we can see that we are not drawing over any of the stuff that we've got in the scene. So what we actually want to do is paint this down until it's as close to that edge as possible. So back in our opacity mask, paint. So we just have enough room for a little bit of maybe edge wear in the roughness. So something like that. Getting some of that bevel around the edge, but getting rid of the jagged outline on it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my other paint, and I'm actually going to go to black now, and I want these to be able to be trimmed out as well. So I'm just going to start removing some of that red until I get close to that bevel. Don't want to get too close to it. And I'm going to go for a softer brush here. And I don't want it wrapping around, so I'm going to just make sure that this is on just UV, or else we're going to get these little turn ups at the end here. We want to make sure size flow is off as well. It can be a little bit fiddly. I do wish there was selection tools in Substance Painter. Okay, and then we want to do the same for the other one. Going to have a bit of a softer fall off on this one. And that should do for that. So now we've got a few little things here that we can cut out and place around our scene. So we just need to turn the colour off on this opacity white. So we can go back to our layer here, turn off the colour. And now we just have a look at our opacity map. We can see what we're going to be left with here. We need to make sure that black's on. So this is going to be our little opacity map. that we can use to cut out our little greebles with. So we'll save that and we can re-export this now, and we can see this time we get an extra map, which is the opacity. Back in Maya, and it's time to start adding those extra little details. So for this we want to get up our normal map so we can see some of them details here. And now we're going to make a new material for this. So first of all, let's just grab a plane and drag this out, and it only needs to be small. Now this is what we're going to do for the details. We're just going to simply map the details to this plane. So if we right click this and assign a new material, go over Lambert again, and this time I'm going to name this VM trim sheet A decals. And again, we just can hook up our maps. So we've got the base color here, and then we want our bump map again, which is the normal. And we can make sure that we set that to tangent space normals. And then we want a transparency map in here. So we can go to opacity here and use that. So now you can see this is obviously a plane, so it's 1:1, and you can see the only things visible on it are then things that we mapped out with that opacity mask. But we don't want them like this, we just want it mapped to one piece. So what we can do is we can come in here, grab our UV shell and just scroll that down. Now the first thing I'm going to add to this is some rivets. So I'm just going to place this over that rivet down so it fits that tile. And I want to get it as close to that opacity map as possible. Just a tiny little bit of breathing room because I don't want too much alpha map sticking over here, because it can increase the work that the engine has to do. So with that made there, I'm going to just make that a little bit smaller, and I'm going to rotate it holding J 90 degrees, and then I'm going to leave this here so I can come back to it and select if I want to, but I'm just going to center the pivot on that and then delete history and freeze transformations. And then in object mode, I'm just going to select this and duplicate it, and then I'm going to move the duplication over here, and then I'm going to decide where I want to place these rivets along this. So holding V, I'm going to snap it to a vertex on the front of this, and then once it's snapped to the front of this, I'm just going to pull it in front a little bit. Now if we don't do this, what will happen is when we get into engine, we'll have something called Z fighting. That's when two faces occupy the exact same space in the engine. They will flicker because the engine doesn't know which one to render on top. So we're just going to pull this out just a couple of points so it just hovers in front of the asset, and I'm going to scale it down a little bit as well. Let's see, how does that look? So I might just scale it down a little bit more. I think it's quite a large rivet, that. We don't want it on the bevel, we want it just outside that bevel. And I'm going to pull it ever so slightly further forwards as well. Okay, so we've got a tiny little rivet there, and you can see just how sharp that detail will be compared to the rest. So it really is just the best way. If we tried to paint this by hand and put a rivet on there in Substance Painter at that size, you would only get a couple of pixels of detail out of that, but we can get right in close here and still have a really sharp rivet. There's just no other way of doing it quite like this. So once that's done, I'm going to Control D and duplicate this up a little bit, and then I'm going to hold Shift and D and just keep hitting Shift and D to duplicate this up to the top. And then I'm going to duplicate all of them and move them over here, and then I'm going to move some down across the bottom as well. And just make sure they're nicely aligned. And I'm going to put some on this front face here as well. And I think I'll do the same here. And I would also like to run some up this face as well. Now this is going to be a little bit more difficult because it's on an angle. But what we can do, if we just duplicate a piece here, we can go to modify and we can snap together tool. So we click that and then click what we want to snap, click what we want to snap, click where we want to snap it, and then hit enter. It will move that to that face, so we can see that's there, but it is selected the front face obviously and move that around because this is only a single-sided plane. So what we need to do is select that plane and then we can rotate it around or we can reverse it. I'm going to rotate, so I'm just going to select rotate, go to object and rotate that. Now this has had the benefit of the fact that it's kept its object position as well, so now we have that perfect angle. So it's snapped to the front of that and we can move this up and keep it in place, knowing that it's going to move along with that. So I'm just going to go into a position where I can see the whole thing, and then I'm going to duplicate this. Ooh. And move it up, and then again I'm going to shift D to duplicate that all the way up there. And I'm also going to make sure that it's definitely stayed on that right angle, and it has. So then I can select all these. And then I can Control D and move them across to this side. Okay. Now I'm going to take some of that ridge detail that we've got on here and I'm going to place that around this as well. Although actually I think first of all I might just grab another one of these here, rotate that around to 90 degrees, and I think I'll place them up the side. So let's just snap that to this vert here and just move it forwards a little bit. And then I'll place that here. It's got rivets down that side, and then I just need to select them, and this time making sure I've only got them selected. Yep. I'm going to collapse them, combine them together, sorry. Duplicate them, snap them to this vertex here, so just in one direction because I don't want to move them up or down. And then I'm going to rotate them around 90 degrees, sorry, 180 degrees, and then pull them out a little tiny bit. It's too much, so we can see right at the side here that's a little bit too much. So I just want it, so it's very hard to see them hovering. Now, Maya might have a little bit of difficulty rendering them, but they should render a little bit better in UE4. And finally, I want to run some around the top of here. So let's grab one of them, just duplicate it again, and I'm going to use the place tool again for this. So we're going to go to create, we're going to go to modify, snap together, click the rivet, and then click on a face, and then hit enter. And then we just need to rotate this around. Pop that slightly above there. Now you can get plugins, placement tool plugins and stuff that make this kind of stuff really easy, where you can just paint them straight onto a surface. And there is ways to set it up in Maya. I've not found a really good way of setting it up in Maya, but there is definitely some free plugins that make this kind of thing a lot easier. But for now, this'll do just fine. And it's also a very useful thing that move, what's it called? That snap together tool is also really useful for a lot of other things as well. So it's good just getting used to it and the fact that it's there. So with these selected, we can combine them. And then let's mirror these across. And we'll do this on world. should be pretty perfect. And then if we center pivot on them, and we want to mirror it across the other way. Let's just make sure that they're just in the exact right position. There we go. So that's the rivets placed around the top of that. And I think that's all the rivets I'm going to do for now. So what else can we pull from this opacity map? So I want to run an edge around this top bit here. So we've already got it cut up to be an edge. So what we can do is, if we just select that and right click and duplicate, and then just move this up slightly above the other one. And then also you can just run the edge in a little bit as well, which is probably best doing by hand. So if we just go to the vertexes here and grab these, we can move them in a little bit. Okay guys, so in that way I showed you how to just duplicate the top face of this, take the vertexes and move them in a little bit to make a thinner piece. And the reason we do want to move this in is in case, you know, in case we put a bevel across the edge here and that we don't want alpha hanging over the edge. Plus we just want to generally make sure the alpha is as small as possible compared to the actual alpha'd part that we're doing. So if I just grab this top face again and duplicate it, and I'm actually going to move it up here, so just a tiny bit. Okay, so previously we grabbed the vertexes and moved them in. But a better way of doing this is, because this piece is a continuous edge, because around the corners here we have a diagonal rather than cutting it across. So this becomes a continuous loop. And we can test that by just grabbing one of these and then double clicking on the next one up, and you can see that it's selected that in a perfect loop. There's nothing breaking that loop from being able to be selected. So what we could actually do is just insert two loops. So we shift right click and go to connect and then just make that 2. That'll give us a nice face on the inside for us to apply our alpha to. Now the problem with this is, if we don't want that exactly split like that, we will find it very hard to scale these up and down evenly. Okay, there's a couple of ways we can do that, but if we just go back a little bit here, another way of doing this would be to connect these again. So we'd make sure we're on edges, go shift right click, connect, and do maybe 2 or 3 until the outer loops are exactly in the place we want, and then accept that. We can select these inner faces, and using control and backspace we can delete them and the vertexes, and then that will leave us with these outside pieces. So we can just click them, delete, click them, delete, and we're left with just the middle strip like that. And the third way of doing this is, without the connect, we can just go to our cut tool and just put a slice in wherever we want. Ultimately, this is probably the easiest and fastest way. And then we can just select those loops and delete them. Again, leaving us with just the strip where we want to run our edge. Now this is going to have the edge run along it, which you'll see in just a moment. But I also want to just point out that this is a great way of running panel loops or little bevel edges around any part of your model. You can always, if you want, say if I wanted a paneled edge to run maybe across here and then down and around like that, I would get a plane and start modeling it to this face. But a faster way to do that is to simply create the shape within this that you want as like a throwaway piece of geometry. So what we can do is we can duplicate this whole piece so we don't completely damage it if we can't undo it, and then we can isolate that duplication. Alright, so we've just got this one piece here, and then say I want an odd panel around the corner here and I want to do it as a strip on a decal sheet, I can just select these ones and I can figure out how to cut them in. Now I can cut them in by hand, but if it's going to be a continuous loop and I have some faces like this, then I could probably do it like this. So I'm going to go down to extrude here, and then I'm just going to do the offset. Okay, now we can see there's some issues with the bottom of that offset there, so I'm just going to leave it without any offset, so we've just got an extrude here, and then I'm going to just scale in the bottom axis there so we don't get any twisting. Okay, then I'm going to accept that, and then I want to select this edge, just move that up, and this edge, and move that up to where we want there. So now I've got this line running around here. Okay, so the bottom is a bit twisted, so I can just go into my vertexes here, just flatten them out, make sure it's nice and neat before I do anything else. And I'm not bothered about what else is happening with this model because we're going to delete this once we've got what we want from it. Okay. Now we can try and select these edges and bevel them, or we could do another extrude and just do the same again. I'm going to try and bevel these first. So if I bevel this, you can see we've got quite a big fraction there. So if I make it smaller, we have this loop here. And then I also want rounded corners on these. So I'm just going to select these ones and bevel them, but give them a few segments, just enough to make it nice and smooth. Okay, now I'm going to select all these, and then once I've selected that loop, I can shift, right click and duplicate faces. And then I just want to move that out a slight bit, not too much, just a tiny bit. We don't want to be able to see that float in there. Okay. And then we can select that, and we can see that's separate, so we can delete the underlying mesh. And now we have this loop here lying on top of this mesh, and obviously we've deleted the one that we made all that mess with trying to make this loop, but we've got this nice little loop here ready to be mapped to a panel line. So it looks like there's actual good geometry in here. So that's the easiest way I found to quickly draw panel lines that are going to be floating mesh geometry around a mesh. So you just duplicate your original mesh as a throwaway, cut it up to how you want, extract the faces that you need, and then delete the excess so you're left with the just the faces you need. So now we can grab them UV shells and we can bring them down. We can actually apply the decals to that, and then we can bring them down over to one of these that we've already set up here. Now let's do the one with the clip on it. I think maybe that'll be some nice detail. So we can change how big we want that and change the tiling of it this way. But I think I like it like that. Some small amount of warping in it. Let's just try and get it away from them corners. We can do that just by moving where it is placed. So that looks pretty good. Slight bit of warping there. Might be able to change that. So probably best to... Okay, so I'm just going to go around the rest of this model now, and I'm going to use some of them decals that we've made and place them on various parts of the model. So one of them things is the card slot, and that will be above the hole at the bottom of the vending machine, and that will just be a receipt printing area or a card receiver. But I'm also going to take them same slots and put them across the toaster, chrome toaster type shape we've got at the top, and that will just mean I'm reusing them decals in various different ways, and they will then become like a mechanical vent, maybe a place for the projection. I would like a projection coming out the top of this in future. So try to reuse your decals in clever ways just to get more from that same trim sheet. Okay, so I've gone over this whole model and I've added all my little pieces, and I've checked to make sure that none of them are hovering too far in front, because it's very easy to accidentally do that. And everything seems okay. So I'm going to select everything in the scene. You want to make sure you delete history and freeze transformations, and then I'm going to file, export selection, and I'm just going to save over my last model. And then back in UE4, I'm going to go to the model, right click and re-import. And then in materials, I'm going to duplicate our trim sheet material, and I'm going to call this one trim sheet decals. Actually, trim sheet A decals, just in case. And then in that trim sheet A decals, I'm going to, if you've not already, import your opacity map, and then drop that into the new decals material. And then what we need to do is change this from surface to deferred decal, and from blend mode to translucent. And then we want to plug in our opacity map into our opacity slot there. And then we can save that. So if we change this to a plane here, we should be able to see our little mask details showing up here. So if we then go back to our models, double click our vending machine, we can drop the new decal sheet onto our new slot there. So now we can see our little decals with the textures applied, showing up pretty well there. Now what we need to do is go back to our decal sheet, and we can change this from translucent to pick up the roughness and colour, or any number of different combinations here. So colour, normal and roughness would be all the mats that we've got. So if we save that, we can see if we look at the rivets on the paint that we've got colour of them rivets being picked up there. And we've still got issues here, which I think is the roughness of the metal that we used for this. And what we can do is we could just change this to use a normal. So we just go back here, click on this, go down and just change this to normal and save that. We can blend just the normal information, but we then get these rivets stand out a lot less. They look like they've been painted, which might be what you wanted. But when you start getting dirt on here and stuff, or some more interesting surface scratches, you might actually find that you want them to stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to go back to this decal. We're not using masks or anything for this. Now we could do that, but I'm just going to use this as is. And I'm going to go back to here and just change that to colour, normal, roughness. Okay, so this is looking really nice. I mean, as is, it looks really sharp. It looks kind of a high poly model. It's got really nice bevels around the edges. It's got some nice high fidelity detail. We could leave it as is if we were doing, say, a really clean scene, although I would always put some sort of roughness mask on it, not just leave it that super clean, because it is far too clean. It's unrealistically clean. It does need some sort of breakup, specular breakup, to help break up the different materials on here. So in this next bit, I'm going to go back into Substance Painter and I'm going to just add a few different roughness masks and a little bit of dirt to these panels to help make this look a little bit more rough and rugged for our cyberpunk world. And I'm going to do a monitor screen as well. And then to finally finish this off, we're going to do some nice stickers and decals that we can add to the decal sheet, just to make this be a little bit more adjustable and give us a little bit more options in what we can do with this trim sheet.